Hey everybody, Jay Weidner here, Reality Check. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. Hit subscribe and the bell and all the other stuff, and tell your friends that a highly intelligent programming is still available on this platform. How long it lasts on this platform, I can't say, but uh, we're here for now. They haven't got it. So anyway, I'm here today with an old friend of mine, Jack Carey. Jack is author of Paranormal Planet, and I forget the name of your Bigfoot book, Jack. Just crossed my mind. I can't remember. Should have wrote it
Bigfoot
down.
Unleashed.
Anyway, Jack, what is it?
Bigfoot Unleashed.
Oh yeah, Bigfoot Unleashed. Good book. I was reading it last night, in fact. Jack's been looking into these things for a long time. He was associated with the late, great J.C. Johnson, who was a really incredible researcher into crypto creatures and those kinds of things. And Jack's really kind of the guy that's carrying on the work now of from J.C. Johnson and some of the other ones that were no longer with us, like John Keel and a lot of others. And Jack's just had kind of a very special set of adventures that he's been through. So, Jack, how are you, first off?
I'm doing well, my friend. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let's start out with your story of the Tombstone in Oklahoma.
Sure.
Tell us about that.
The murdered by human wolves case. Yes.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It's an ongoing case. I received the case from a private investigator who was actually pursuing a missing persons case in that area. He was told about the tombstone and located it. And from that point, she spent 20 years investigating this headstone that reads "Murdered by Human Wolves." It's known as the Catherine Cross headstone. And she had some pretty profound experiences during that 20-year period, including some run-ins with what appeared to be actual dogmen-like creatures. One of the
What are dogmen?
What's that?
What are dogmen?
What are dogmen? Yeah, dogmen are, it's a variation of the werewolf theme, although were animals are thought to be people who have a genetic ability to literally change into another biological creature. Where dogmen are concerned, they're thought to have this form at all times, 24 hours a day. And that's kind of the difference between the two. But we had an eyewitness named Michael Grayhawk who recounted that he saw what he described as being a naked man running on all fours very rapidly, but with the elongated face of a wolf. And it was able to jump over a very high fence that he was standing near. And he drew a picture of this thing. It was interesting because I was doing research and I found all of these studies linking feral children who were raised in the wild by animals who began to take on their physical appearances.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, it was the one thing all of the feral children had in common out of all of those studies that I went through. So this is an area where this headstone is not the only one. It says "Murdered by Human Wolves." There was a story that came out at that period of time suggesting that the doctor in town, Dr. Yates, had performed an illegal surgery on Catherine Cross, which they thought may have been an abortion. They don't really know because it's not in the records. He was acquitted of those charges. And so we're left wondering who would inscribe that, on the tombstone. These are people that were in the late 1800s, and at that time there was only 100 people in that town. Everybody knew everybody. It was like, kind of like one big family in a small town in South Central Oklahoma at that time. And it really makes you wonder, what would it take, a Bible Belt, God-fearing people like that to inscribe onto this tombstone "Murdered by Human Wolves." It's been suggested online that they were suggesting that the doctor was a human wolf, but it doesn't say murdered by Dr. Yates, which you would think if they were going to put that on after the fact, it would. Why would you put murdered by human wolves, and how would anybody make the association? So
it's also kind of interesting because Oklahoma and North Texas and Western Arkansas have a lot of dogman sightings.
a huge number. And the town that this happens in Konawa, Oklahoma, is really sort of a ground zero, an epicenter for dogman sightings throughout the South. And even today, you look at some of the work done by, gosh, I'm trying to think of her name, the lady who wrote Beast of Bray Road. It always escapes me when I try to think of her name for some reason, and I know her.
I do too. That's why it's so embarrassing. I can't say her name because I know her, and I've read all of her books.
Yeah, I have too.
In fact, I'd like to get her on the show. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, that'll pop in my head in just a second. In fact,
It'll
I have
pop
one
into mine
right around here. Anyway, she had a number, a file of reports coming from that exact area in Oklahoma, around Muskogee, Eufaula, and Konawa area, ongoing, of people having really dramatic dogman encounters. So,
and the other thing is that, I mean, they see the dogman, and it's always much more frightening in some ways than Sasquatch. But we don't really, I don't think we've ever really got a dogman that's killed anyone, has it? Do we know?
No, that we know of. And
that we know.
Yeah, maybe they have, and the person just didn't survive. But you're right. In most of these eyewitness cases, there's not really even much of a, I would say, a clear and present threat from the animal. It's not like it runs at them pretending it's going to attack and stuff like that. It almost occurs to me like it's a scarecrow. That whatever intelligence is behind it, put it there to scare away whatever is there so that it wouldn't pay attention to what it's really up to. And to me, that indicates an ET intelligence. And in my new book, Bigfoot Unleashed, I have a chapter where I talk about Bigfoot versus Dogman. And it's fascinating to me because I investigated a number of dogman cases, and these eyewitnesses were every bit as sincere and were every bit as touched in their daily life by their encounter as any of the Sasquatch witnesses that I encountered, and they were extremely credible. And I began to realize that in both situations, you have these cryptid animals running parallel. You have an ancient oral history about them, oral traditions. You have physical evidence being left at the scene, and you have a ever increasing body of highly credible eyewitnesses. And one of those eyewitnesses happens to be the farmer who owns the field adjacent to Bray Road. Now, this is a farmer who has spotted
Linda Godfrey.
Linda Godfrey, there you go. Sorry, Linda. I know you're out there.
Yeah.
She's going to get on to me next time.
Yeah.
But the farmer there saw the beast on 2 occasions, and at the same time began to have cattle mutilations on his land. Now, he set up a camera on a downed deer that he had downed on his land for this purpose, to bait whatever it was, and he put up a camera. He did not get the dogman. Instead, what he got was a very strange mist that appears out of nowhere. It floats over the animal, completely covers it, and when the mist dissipates, the deer carcass is completely gone. At the same time, he got a number of photographs and video of UFO activity above his property. So there's a causal link there between ET and this dogman. the physical evidence I found just amazingly intriguing. So Dogman footprints are a big thing of debate. For a long time, people investigating Dogman, we can't quite zero in on the exact kind of print because it seemed to differ from sighting to sighting. Leave prints behind. They're saying the same thing, upright running canine, but it's leaving a different kind of footprint. This gentleman has been able to document now on many occasions a canine print that has 5 toes and 7 pads, and the 2 extra pads are positioned right behind the 5 pads in a position that would be biologically logical if you were going to have an upright running canine supporting weight in that position. Right. So, and I have a picture of that in my Bigfoot Unleashed too, to show people just, how strange the prints are. And with Sasquatch, that's also what I discovered, a very strong connection, causal connection, I believe, a very strong body of evidence to connect them to an ET intelligence.
Well, the mist is very likely plasma, first off. And I'm sure whoever the witness was, they reported hearing electrical popping. So I've actually seen this kind of mist too. It's not a mist. And it comes from some intelligence that's not of this earth, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing to me, he has all of this on camera. This camera picked up this whole thing, the mist going over the animal, it disappearing, the animal just gone. And it's just fascinating. It really is.
It's weird how the ETs seem to like beef.
Yeah, maybe. Often it's the weirdest thing. Another pattern is that they're often seen eating roadkill. And how attention gathering though is that this crazy, wild looking werewolf thing that humans have talked about on the side of the road, and it's eating a nasty piece of roadkill that catches a human attention away from anything else that could possibly be going on.
Is it possible that they themselves are of extraterrestrial origin?
I truly believe they are. I don't believe that they're aliens like we believe, like they're just autonomous. I think they are chimeric constructions, and I think that they are being genetically created by the same alien intelligence that are flying around the craft that the Pentagon's now, beginning to talk about. And
what would be the point?
Yeah,
what's the point of this chimeric?
Yeah, and so that's the other thing I've been working on for a while now, is I've asked myself the same question, why? And with Sasquatch, it appears as though this was done in the ancient past to genetically create, or this may have been the original being on the planet that they weren't able to corrupt. It could be either or. But there's an extreme interest in the genetics of Sasquatch. And that goes back into ancient history, even to the point of the Sumerian tablets, and with Enkidu, 4,500-year-old tablets talking about Enkidu, which is a perfect description for Sasquatch today.
Yeah.
And I have a file that's 5 inches thick of encounters of people who say, man, this thing had a very human face, so human. I couldn't believe how human, And I've got a photograph from the Great Falls area of North Carolina, which you saw in my book, close up face photograph. And you can see the chimeric construction work there. It's either that or they were able to kind of separate the two genetics out of that creature, because the upper head is all primate and the lower part looks all prehistoric human. It's just disturbing.
Absolutely. And also, it should be noted that the only primate where the female has protruding breasts are humans. We're the only ones, except for Bigfoot. Bigfoot also has protruding breasts, just like human females. So, you got to wonder, and who are they really hiding from? since they're forest ninjas and they can leap from tree to tree, 30 feet, they can throw trees, they can throw rocks the size of basketballs 40 yards. If they played football, it would all be, first stringers. Why would they be afraid of us?
You could say that.
Why would they be shy of us? They could tear us to ribbons.
Oh yeah, you're talking about a creature that can literally tear your head off using its thumb and index finger only.
Yep.
And you're talking about a creature, and this is hard for people to visualize. You're talking about a creature that can run 65, 70 miles an hour over uneven mountainous terrain.
Yep.
Cheetah speed. It has eyesight that allows it to both see from miles away, but also in different light spectrums.
Yeah, that's right. Infrared and ultraviolet. Yep.
Right. And it can spot a tree camera from a mile away. We sell 200,000 tree cameras in North America every year, and not one of them yet has captured one doing a photo shoot.
Nope.
And that's because they can see in that light. And I talk about in my book how there are biological precedents for this, right? So reindeer can see an infrared light, and so can antelope in infrared light. And when we look at the DNA that was collected in the Sasquatch Genome Project, the geneticist involved, Dr. Ketchum, who I had many private conversations with, and I'm highly confident in her, and her conclusions. But she stated that to her it looked like there were fused genetics from other species into the Y paternal DNA of this creature. The X, obviously, it always comes back or the mitochondrial comes back as human female, Homo sapien every time.
Yep.
And in the Y or the paternal, it comes back as unknown primate, because that's the closest thing it can match to in the World Genetic Bank, right, is a primate. And yet, within this primate DNA, she's saying that there are traits of other species spliced in a way that, we're doing chimera work here on the Earth right now. It's, it's got to be extremely elementary, but recently we were able to perfectly fuse monkey and human genes into 17 embryos that lived for 17 days until they were terminated on purpose for moral reasons. And here's a creature who seems to display both, and whose DNA says that it's both. So the other thing is the Sasquatch can use infrasound, right? So there's a precedent for infrasound being used in other species, like elephants can use infrasound for long-range communication, and tigers use infrasound in their roar to freeze their prey for a minute second so they can get that, leap on them. And we have nonstop sighting reports of Sasquatch using infrasound, and so it's interesting to me how the DNA and what she was telling me in these personal conversations matched up with what my research led me down, which was the idea of chimera constructions.
So why do you think the Green Berets are called out so often on these sightings? And they show up with 6 or 7 guys with high-powered weapons, and what's that all about?
That is interesting to me for a number of reasons. So I've documented a huge amount of evidence, and David Paulides talks about this, so does James Bobofe. In fact, they did an interview where they were talking about this, but in 20% of all highly credible Bigfoot sightings that are reported, a UFO is also reported at the scene. That's a huge number, not to say that there's a causal connection of some kind. And other researchers have described paranormal activity occurring while they're out trying to get Sasquatch activity documented. And many of them have seen anomalous lights moving through the forest, etc. So for me, I believe there's a very strong ET connection to the creatures. And because of that, I think it's going to naturally draw our military to wherever they are and where they might be interacting with this extraterrestrial intelligence. Not only that, but how valuable would those genetics be if you could replicate that kind of chimera work? You know, the reason those scientists said they did what they did with the monkey genes and the human embryos was so that they could figure out how to do deeper chimera work. For instance, their chimera work with pig genes in humans wouldn't take as good as these monkey genes did. So by studying the monkey genes and how efficiently they were able to do what they did, they can use that and apply it to this other chimera work, which is, you know, clearly immoral.
Yeah. Also, I guess if you're going to create super soldiers, you may want to get some of those genes there from the big guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what would be better than a 9 foot tall, you know, super soldier ripping through the woods at 60 miles an hour?
The ultimate army, you know what I mean? And Linda Godfrey, you know, God bless her. She is a very smart, open-minded lady for a lady who comes from the Midwest, you know what I mean? And I love that about her. But she was approached by a gentleman who said that he was in government remote viewing program and that he had targeted dogmen. And in his remote viewings, he stated that these creatures were somehow a soldier class of an alien intelligence that was here on the planet, that a lot of them got left behind, that they're currently living down in the crevices of the world, basically, and they're biding their time, awaiting for a point where, you know, maybe their masters come back or a mission point to happen. But I found that fascinating. And she said that she was able to verify his military credentials and never released the name, of course, but found that very interesting.
Well, I mean, when the Spanish first conquered Mexico, they would bring these big, huge dogs with them, and they would have spike collars and pointers out the head and spikes coming out the sides and on their armor. And then they would starve the dogs for like 4 days. And then they would feed it an Indian, a native Mexican, right? Then they would starve it another 3 days right before the battle. And in the battle, it was what, 600 Spanish and 10,000 Mayans, I think they were. Right. And they released these dogs. And the dogs did like 20% of the work before they even had to come down the hill with the, I mean, it was just, you know, just incredible. And so I can just, so they have been used, was what I'm saying. The canines have been used as weapons of war very effectively. So would it really be that surprising? Especially, you know, just looking at a dogman would be intimidating enough for, you know, for anybody. Would just, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you look at the icons throughout history, like Anubis. And when I was kind of researching the oral histories of dogmen in North America, what I came across was an interesting connection between the Aztecs, who some of their elders were saying at that time that they thought they may have come from Wisconsin, a place known as Astalon State Park. And I've got the step pyramids there, I'm sure you're aware of. They look very much like the Aztec pyramids. And strangely enough, it's here in that setting in 1888 where you have one of the very first dogman sightings recorded. And it was a night watchman, and at this school for children that had some kind of ailment or you know, handicap of some kind. And so he sees the creature digging in one of these burial mounds near these pyramids. And he saw it on 2 separate nights. The second night, the creature stood up, turned around, and looked at him and said the word Gadara, as far as we can tell. That's what his testimony was, as close as he could tell. It said the word Gadara, which is interesting because that's a village that was mentioned in biblical times, name of a village. So, so I found that causal connection interesting. And just like the Egyptians, the Aztecs worshipped a dog-headed, upright walking, humanoid formed creature. And his name was Zoloidal, which you can look up. And so it's very interesting. You look at the stone depictions of their dog-headed god and the depictions of Anubis, and they were both the guardians of the underworld.
That's right. And didn't Marco Polo actually talk about some dog-headed creatures that he encountered in his many adventures?
He did, and man, that really, it stands out as one of the strangest historical anomalies that historians can't explain. There's no explaining it. It'll just turn and walk away. But Marco Polo, in his writings, recorded having come across an island of these creatures who were human intelligence-like enough that they were able to trade with them. They actually traded with them. And he named that island Cynocephaly. And these creatures were known as the Cynocephaly, which is very, very interesting. And I came across some ancient tapestries from that period actually depicting these creatures on this island. Really? It's just bizarre.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a fascinating story I heard about this guy in the 30s. He'd lost everything in the Depression, and it was in Texas, North Texas. And he bought a little tiny ranch. It was all he could afford, was this rundown ranch that was completely had to be repaired, everything. So he moves his family there, and immediately they begin having encounters. They find a hole in the ground. He sends one of his workers down into the hole. He never comes back. And there was a nest of these dogmen. This was in 1936, I think. And they began attacking the house at night. Finally, he has to move the family out because he's afraid they're going to get killed. Then he and his buddies all get together and with as many weapons as they can, and they kill them all, essentially, over like a 3-week period. They track him down and kill him. And it was just a hair-raising story that this guy, this farmer rancher, was telling, and it was written down in like 1942. The whole story was.
Wow.
Yeah. So, they're here.
Yeah, they are here, and it amazes me that there's many people in the Bigfoot community who, turn their head every time they hear the word Dogman. And a lot of them have preconceived notions that Sasquatch is a grade A for its gigantus pithecus, from migrating from Asia, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody sort of has these preconceived notions. And when you examine the evidence for dogmen, like you could literally take the head off a Sasquatch, put it onto the Dogman without anybody seeing it, and all of the bottom stuff, all the notes are going to be the same. You know what I mean? Like it's a credible witness that it left physical evidence. There was, like it happened in an area where there's Native American, lore, and so that to me was something I couldn't discount or look past. And me, like going down this path, it's been a 25-year plus kind of forensic study of Sasquatch. And I was very surprised where it led me to down this path. I didn't want it to, actually. And I tell people that all the time as a professional investigator. I have to go where the evidence leads me and not where I would like it to lead me. And that's a difficult path to walk sometimes. But I found it a very, very useful tool, having been growing up a fan of Sherlock Holmes. He once had a great quote, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which I believe is the basis of all good investigation. And that is, whenever you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, has to be the truth. And if you follow that guideline, it automatically gets rid of your own personal prejudices about what you want the result to be. And what I've discovered is that more often than not, it's the most highly improbable of the possibilities that becomes the one that's the true one. And so that's kind of how I pursued this investigation. Over that period of time, I've been able to eliminate a lot of impossibilities in my own mind as far as the origin and source of the creatures. And these days, I'm focused on remains retrieval. We've got to have some physical evidence of their remains. I mean, Bigfoot DNA won't do anybody any good right now because they've never had a specimen that they take the DNA literally off of, put it in their machine and say, yep, this came from that. And now it can go into the World Genetic Bank. And the only reason it comes up as unknown is because it's never been documented and there's never been a piece of it put into the World Genetic Bank. So every sample that comes in, that's exactly where it goes for comparison. The World Genetic Bank is where everything is compared. Every known species on the planet is there. And it'll come back and say, oh, it's a coyote, it was a monkey, etc. And this one always comes back unknown and human. The mitochondrial always comes back human. And I documented 4 different cases where DNA was successfully retrieved. And in each case, it came back as both human and unknown. And there's no way that all 4 of those cases were because of contaminated DNA. In fact, all 4 corroborate one another.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, you ever heard of these people will be walking in the woods and they'll see like a shimmering light and they see a humanoid figure, but it's invisible. And it looks a little bit like Predator in the Predator movies. You ever heard of those stories?
Oh, God, yeah. In fact,
there's always UFOs associated with them.
Yeah, well, not only have I heard of them, I've been doing an in-depth investigation of the phenomenon. And on my YouTube channel, which is just Paranormal Intelligence Agency, I've produced a video called Invisible Predator in the Woods, and it shows the original footage of one of these creatures taken by a Bigfoot investigator named Bob Garrett, who J.C. Johnson knew and was able to get a copy of this footage before the Department of Homeland Security showed up to Bob Garrett's house and took everything. And this was shortly after he had posted it on YouTube, right? It was getting amazing hits, and all of a sudden, bam, it gets shut down. They show up, they take everything, and Bob Garrett disappears. And we're left with this footage of this shimmering, right? You know? So I made this video showing that footage, juxtaposed to 2 other research groups who have filmed the same thing, juxtaposed to the account of Dr. Bruce Maccabee's wife on their own land, having seen one. And I have to ask everybody out there, so here's a predator-like entity straight out of the movies, right? You can see the shimmering. It looks like they described it perfectly, and it has an ET connection in the movies. And then here, the wife of a man who's known to be a highly credible UFO analysis guy. I mean, he's a doctor of optics, and he's been on numerous UFO documentaries talking about the craft that have been filmed. And his wife has a run-in with one of these creatures on his land.
Pretty strange.
I mean, that's too random for me as an investigator. There has to be a causal connection between the 2. And for me, that's a keystone causal connection. The fact that it happened to him on his property means that the ET connection for me is set. It has to be.
And there was a UFO about 3 blocks away from there over a stadium, a high school football stadium.
Yes, exactly. So
yeah, that is strange. So what do you think they are?
Well, I mean, I more and more, Jay, when I see them, like you, Hollywood freaks me out, right? So, this whole Project Mockingbird, and it must have morphed into something else, and how they're able to put these images out that far in advance before we actually begin to film them and see them is really shocking to me. But that's obviously what happened with Predator. I mean, it's just dead on. Here's an ET of some kind. We don't know if they're like that, where they're hunting humans. We don't really know what they're doing, but it's an obvious ET connection.
Yeah, they seem to have weight and gravity. They're not like ghosts or something. And
No. And yeah, I mean, the footage we have, they're moving foliage out of the way as it's walking, and you can see the full shimmering, of the creature. It's quite unsettling. And I remind people, poor Bob Garrett. So this guy, he's a Bigfoot guy, right? And it's creepy enough. I've been out there alone so many times, and this film was originally called Bob Garrett's 3 Miles In, right? Because this poor guy was 3 miles into some of the deepest woods you can imagine, and he catches that on film, and then he's got a horrifying 3-mile hike back out. That would have been just, the worst hike of all time.
Invisible humanoid chasing after you. Oh my God.
That's good.
That's funny. Yeah, so we don't really know what they are, but they appear to have been around for at least 10 or 15 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and maybe before that, but as far as I'm aware, that's the first real evidence to pop up.
Yeah, very interesting. So, of all the stories that you've looked at a lot. Like, what's the weirdest story that you've ever come up against?
The absolute weirdest story. God, that's going to be a tough one. To me, the black-eyed kid is always going to be the weirdest I ever came up with. But
what's that one?
Actually experienced. So me and JC had a run-in with the black-eyed kid, if you know what those are, a BEK.
No, tell us.
Okay, so this is a horrifying thing. It changed both of our lives forever, Jay. I mean, this was something that really got us bad. But so I was on an investigation that he had me go on with him that sort of stretched the line between crypto and paranormal and UFO activity, he thought. And he needed somebody to go down and help him out. And he called this the ultra-terrestrial case, because he thought these might be aliens from here on the Earth, somewhere in inner Earth or something like that. So he gave him the name ultra-terrestrial rather than extraterrestrial. But this case became really widely known at the time. And so we were out there, we're investigating this case. A UFO went over a Navajo family's property. They bolted for cover. There was military presence. They called 911, and a military, group showed up instead, confiscated all of the evidence, left them completely traumatized. And so we were out there investigating this, and we were going way, this was on the Navajo Indian reservation in the middle of nowhere. And we go way out on the edge of this area where one of them thought they were hearing the sound of heavy machine gun fire. And we were thinking, as a theory, perhaps this craft was taking heavy machine gun fire from some sort of military unit in that direction. And we were going to be able to find some shell casings, some sort of physical evidence to back up the noise. And so we get all the way out on this area, and we're being driven by one of our Navajo guides. And we're going down, it's kind of like a frontage road. I mean, on the left-hand side was a railway, and on the right-hand side, just open Navajo reservation land as far as you can see, you know, and it was a dirt road. We see a figure way off in the distance, and they're walking off on the side of the road. And it's right where all of the heavy cactus are and the jagged rock and everything. And we're thinking, oh, it's going to be an elderly Navajo guy tending sheep. There's a lot of that out there. We get up to her. No, this is a girl walking in this brutal terrain with 6-inch high cork high heels, which caught my attention right away. I'm like, what? She's wearing a ragged, torn jean dress that looked like it came out of like the 1980s, right? Like just ragged. It looked like she'd been sleeping in a ditch, but her hair and her face were perfect. Like she'd come out of a beauty salon or something, like just perfect. And she was looking down at the ground. She stopped walking and she just stopped and she started looking down at the ground as we pulled up next to her. And JC, the consummate gentleman, you know, he rolls down his window and I'm sitting to the left of him looking across his lap out the window at her. And he goes, ma'am, are you okay? Can we offer you any assistance? And we're thinking, you know, it's 109 degrees out there in the middle of literally nowhere. This girl's going to die, you know, she's going to die. And she's looking down and got the weirdest feeling. And she just looked up at us, opened her eyes, and they were pitch black. There's no white at all. And she smiled at me and JC and she goes, I got everything I need. And as soon as those words hit our ears, it was instantaneous, overwhelming sickness, projectile vomiting, the type of sickness where you're just instantly wiped out. The Navajo driving the car punched it and got us all the way 2 miles away before we told him we got to get out to get some air. Got out, you know, sitting there trying to catch our breath. And I look up and that girl is literally walking right down the road towards us in human speed. Couldn't have possibly have been, right? And come to find out, this has happened a number of occasions across the country where people are coming across what they call black-eyed kids or BEKs. And it goes back to the original encounter we know is a man named Brian Bethel in Amarillo, Texas. And it was 2 boys that approached his car. And it's interesting because in each case, they're very aggressive about getting in, either to the car or to the house or something of that nature. In our case, she wasn't like that at all. And it occurred to me that we're investigating this ET case, and all of a sudden, this other paranormal phenomenon manifests itself randomly, and it just happens to derail our entire investigation. I mean, JC was never the same again. It fried his brain, and he couldn't, like, he had an amazing, almost superhuman sense of direction. Never again. He would get lost even trying to go home. And I was sick for 2 weeks, vomiting a black liquid fluid. So sick I could only crawl to the bathroom and back. I honestly thought I was going to die. And so it occurs to me, there's this ET connection there as well. What we might be seeing is either ET hybrid children being tested, you're monitoring them with interacting with humans, etc. And we might be seeing that in this case that we were on, and it was sent on purpose to derail us.
Which it did.
Yeah, and it did. It succeeded.
Well, that's super creepy.
Yeah, it was super creepy. It messed us both up for a while. We made it back to their mud hut, Hogan. Went inside, and they had to go. The family members that were on the property went and got a holy man. They came back with healers and all kinds of stuff, and kept vigil all night in case this girl showed back up. You know, it was intense.
Yeah, that sounds it. So, what's your next plans for your next book or whatever?
Well, I just got done with Bigfoot Unleashed, and I'm actually doing a live show every Thursday night on it's the Beyond Explanation channel, EXP. And I'm doing a show called Paranormal Planet on Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Central. And it's named after my second book, Paranormal Planet. And as you know, I introduced my unified field theory of paranormal activity, which stipulates how and why all paranormal activity can and does occur on this planet.
Why don't you run through that? Can you do that for us?
Yeah, so I developed a theory that, and it occurred to me during all of my investigations, that paranormal activity seemed to have a singular source origin. And instead of finding one, I found two during all of the years of investigation. And I discovered that all paranormal activity can be divided into two subcategories. One is interaction with extraterrestrial intelligence, and that covers 50% of all known paranormal activity. It has to do with that interaction. All UFO sightings, abductions, animal mutilations, you name it, goes on and on and on. The other 50% of all paranormal activity is interdimensional in nature. And it occurred to me because of work like Jonathan Keel was one of the first to notice that there were various areas around the country where it appeared there were wide array of paranormal activity going on in kind of smaller areas. You know, you wouldn't think you would get a Bigfoot sighting and a UFO sighting, et cetera, all in one spot, which, by the way, happened in 1971 in the Blue Book case and was investigated by the CIA. It was one of their main Blue Book cases they didn't tell the public about, but that I talk about. But in my theory, I discovered that in all of these places where there's all of this paranormal activity occurring in a small geographic area, there are huge quartz crystal deposits underneath. And I'm a big science buff, and I came across what's called the Woodward effect or the Mach effect. And there's a scientist who's built what's called the Mach effect thruster. And they discovered that as a body of mass travels through space, there's these tiny little minute fluctuations in the mass itself. And you can harness those fluctuations as its own type of energy, and it produces kind of a 0-point energy. And that struck me because for a long time, I'd been trying to figure out how quartz crystal could be ionized in a way that would produce electromagnetic fields that were strong enough that our physicist would say, yeah, that could penetrate into another dimension. And here you have the Earth traveling through space. There's minute fluctuations taking place in the Earth's crust. It's compressing all that crystal. It becomes ionized and it emits these hugely strong electromagnetic fields like Sedona. Those mountains are 500 times stronger than the surrounding countryside. That kind of field can literally create a tear, a momentary tear in the electromagnetic membrane that's separating our dimension from another. And we get intermittent activity between the two, and we describe that as paranormal. And, I call the Earth the paranormal planet and named it my book that because, it's possible that we're one of, if not the only planet that has this particular kind of topography with all these huge quartz crystals that just naturally open up interdimensional doorways right and left without anybody having to do anything. Maybe that's part of the reason we get
Sedona spelled backwards is anodes.
Is it really? Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
And that's what those spikes, the red spikes that are all over, they're like these big anodes, and they're right and creating tears in the fabric, which allows things to happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I just recently came across a missing person, a historical vanishing that took place in Sedona of some treasure hunters who had gone there in the area and had been told about the doorways that went into other dimensions by the Native Americans. And one of their party actually disappeared right in front of them in midair as he walked underneath one of these arches. So it's just, it's one of those things. How horrifying would that be to just get sucked into another dimension and can't get back?
I heard a story of it was like in 1920 in Arches National Park. 3 Native American boys were playing, and one of them leaped through one of the arches and didn't come out the other side. And they never found him. And then about 80 years later, someone was hiking up in the high mountains a couple miles away, and they found the body, skeleton, but still with the Native American clothes on, of a young boy. Wow. The clothing was the same clothing that the kid had on when he disappeared. And so you have to wonder, also, is it possible that Bigfoot can see these portals and these electrical openings and use them?
Yes. And that's, people talk about Bigfoot's ability to cloak itself and Bigfoot's ability to be interdimensional in nature. I don't know about the interdimensional part. It's entirely possible that they can use these natural doorways to pop in and out. But what I did find was that in their hair morphology of the creatures, which we accumulated a lot of hair of the creatures, we found something really interesting. So instead of a medulla in the center of the hair shaft, there's this type of oil, and it's a highly reflective kind of an oil. And so, like the photograph I have of the creature in North Carolina, when they crouch down into foliage, this oil absorbs all of that green color. It's amazing. And they're almost like a chameleon effect when they crouch down. And we figured this out because we took that photograph with it looks green. You can see the black in the head and everything, but man, it looks like a green creature. And you strip away the blue light, all the green and blue light, and it leaves the picture that you see in the book there with all of the actual bone structure and everything left. And you can see where the hair is able to pick up that color and project it, outward. So in my mind, they have sort of nature's perfect camouflage, no matter where they are, no matter what kind of foliage they're in, they're going to blend in perfectly with it.
That would explain a lot for sure, because I can't tell you how many times I've been talking to someone and had them, they were telling me that they were out in the woods and they were looking into the woods, and then all of a sudden the woods started moving, and it was, it was a Sasquatch out there, but they didn't see it. And they were looking right at it. So. Right.
Yeah. And exactly. You can be looking right at them and not even see them. Most amazing creature on the planet.
Oh my God, amazing creature. The fact that it's out there and it's 8 to 12 feet tall and it's right here in the world with us and we don't see it is like, and it's real. I mean, I know it's real. I've had too many people I trust who've seen them. So I know it's real, and I know you've seen it. And
and that's what I tried to basically do in my book is try to reconcile that crazy juxtaposition of how is a possible creature like this could go undetected by our mainstream scientists, and we can't get the remains. And in my conclusion, it's because of their extremely special DNA and the abilities that DNA gives this creature. Whether that's chimera construction from an ET intelligence or somehow developed here naturally, I don't know, but it's because of their just amazing DNA. And I remind people, when you look at Sasquatch, their DNA puts them way up here above all the life forms on the planet. The next closest life form might have like 2 really special abilities, and they're like right here. And there's literally nothing to fill in that gap. There's no creatures that are kind of like Sasquatch, but not as good. You know what I mean? Like, it's bizarre. That gap cannot be explained in any normal, natural, biological way.
Yeah, and their situational awareness is through the ceiling. I mean, they seem to be able to know exactly where to stand, to be hidden. And it's just, I've looked at a lot of footage from national forest cams that are out in the woods, and you can literally see the guy out there, but he's hiding behind the trees and very deftly moving from tree to tree, so you can't really ever see him, but you can see it sort of moving.
Yeah, and a little known thing in the Bigfoot community, and I've got 4 different cases of it now, is the fact that Sasquatch has penetrated military security, and sometimes multiple layers of military security. And the other thing that's done the same thing are UFOs over our nuclear installations, which is what riled up Senator Harry Reid, and he went to the Congress and said, "Hey guys, we just had something shut down all of our nuclear missiles over here at Edwards Air Force Base. What are you going to do about it?" So that also shows an ET connection, I think. Here's an animal that can get past that security.
Okay. Can anyone talk to them? Oh, mind talk. I'll let Jack have that one.
In all of my years of investigating, I've not come across a psychic or anyone who said they've had telepathic communication with them. So unknown to me at this time.
Yep, unknown. However, Bigfoot, many people have reported it.
Many.
Yeah. Anything else, Mac? Okay, great. Well, Jack, we're reaching the end of the show. I wanted to thank you for all of your work and for your friendship with me. And again, the books are Paranormal Planet and Bigfoot Unleashed. The website is Paranormal Intelligence Agency, PIA, right?
Yep, paraintelagency.com.
Yeah. Good site too, by the way. Good pictures and video.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Come by and see the live show on Thursday nights, Beyond Explanation channel. I cover a different paranormal topic every single week. So last week I did the Hopi prophecies, so it was really cool.
I'd like to hear that. You can
find me there. You can contact me on the website, and yeah, come by and check it out.
I will. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching Reality Check. I'm Jay Weidner. We've been with Jack Cary talking about monsters and men and all sorts of stuff out in the woods that no one knows about. Hit subscribe and like and all that other stuff, and I will be back. Thanks for watching.